Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're well. So, rent to rent, probably my one of my favorite strategies for a couple of different reasons, to be perfectly honest with you. When I first started in property, I bought a few properties and they were just normal buy to lets. And this is before I was really educated in property. So we're talking like 15 to 20 years ago. And I bought these buy to lets and I thought I was doing the right thing. And I put the buy to lets out there and I tenanted them and the occupancy was great. And after 6 months, I looked back at those properties and I thought, I'm only making £100 a month. What the hell am I doing? Why am I doing this wrong? What's going on? I own buy to lets now. I'm a property investor. I should be making thousands of pounds. And it just wasn't happening. And I couldn't work out why. And that was the trigger for me to really understand what property investing is, how to do property investing, and all the options out there to invest in property. And I spent a long time researching all the different strategies that I could adopt. And the next strategy that I chose was rent to rent because I needed to work on cash flow. I wanted to work on cash flow so I could exit the business that I was running, that I also owned, and selling that business would then give me more cash to start investing in property differently, to start buying HMOs for myself. But rent to rent was the strategy that I next went to after buy to let. After kind of, I would say the failing at buy to let. After failing at buy to let, I went to rent in order to set myself up properly. And I consider rent to rent to be the first strategy that I used to really become a property investor. And I think rent to rent is a phenomenal tool. And hopefully in this webinar, you're going to think the same by the end. So rent to rent, it creates cash flow for you. It's one of the best cash flow strategies because it requires little from you in terms of cash to create this machine that just keeps pumping out money for you every single month. So, what is rent to rent? It's a really, really simple model. And basically, what you're doing is you're renting a property from a property owner. You're taking that property and then you're going to rent that property out yourself in a way that generates a lot more income. That's basically what you're doing. So the box on the left there is you pay the landlord £1,000 a month to rent that property. And then what you do is you use one of two strategies to do this. You either use HMO or serviced accommodation. They're the most common. You can do it in other ways, but they're the most common. You either use HMO or serviced accommodation. And from renting that property out as either one of those two strategies, HMO or serviced accommodation, you increase the amount of money that you make from that property up to £3,000 a month. So you pay the landlord the £1,000 that they want for the rent, you pay the bills, and what you're left with is your profit. So you can see that it's a very simple, it's a very straightforward way to run a business to generate more of a margin, generate more profit than you have in liabilities, and that margin goes in your pocket. So from this situation where you're paying the landlord £1,000 a month and you're making £3,000 a month, let's say you got £500 worth of bills. So now this situation that you've just created is going to make you about £1,500 per month without owning that property in any way. That is essentially what rent to rent is. So pros and cons of operating a rent to rent strategy. So the pros from a financial point of view are fairly straightforward. There's no deposit needed to get started. So in that previous example, let's say that property operates on like a 10% buy to let return. So that £1,000 a month means that property is probably worth £1,200. Sorry, £120,000. So if you were going to buy that property for £120,000, you're going to need £30,000 as a deposit, 30 grand, because you're going to need 25% for an investment deposit on a mortgage, 30 grand. So you could save and save and save and save and make money from that, from your savings until you get to the point of 30 grand. And then you could go and buy that property. Now, I don't know about you, but personally, for me, that's going to take years for me to get there. However, with rent to rent, you don't need that money. You don't need that deposit. So that's a massive pro. That gets you started in investing in property before all the other people that are trying to buy that haven't got the deposit yet. Another big benefit of rent to rent is that it's fast to set up, so you can have income in weeks. Again, if you're going to buy a property, you need to purchase that property, right? Average conveyancing time to buy a property in the UK at the minute is about 6 months. So you decide today to buy a property, you're not going to be able to make money off that property for, well, 6 months you'll own it, then let's say another month to set up. So 7 months. Your money's going to be tied up. You can't spend it on anything else. You need to spend it on this property. So it's going to be tied up for at least 7 months before you start making money. With rent to rent, signing a rental contract with an owner, a lease with an owner, if you see a property now in the next 5 minutes, you could technically have a contract signed between you and that owner to secure that property to you for the next 5 years by the end of the day. And you could start organizing that property and setting that property up to use it as service accommodation or HMO by starting tomorrow. So it's a much faster turnaround. When you make the decision to use rent to rent, to do rent to rent as a strategy, you can have it set up and running far, far faster than if you were going to buy property. You can structure your expenditure for that property as well, because you've got that landlord that's invested into that property. That it's their property. Because you've got that landlord, you could structure it in a way where that landlord is carrying some of that financial burden for you. If you need to furnish the property, that landlord might be prepared to provide that property furnished. If you need to do some compliance work to that property to set it up as a HMO, they might have already done that for you. Or they might be willing to put some money into the property to get it up to scratch so that they know that in the contract that you sign with them, they're not going to have any void periods for the next 5 years. And that can be a significant improvement on what the way that property's been performing since they owned it. So they might be willing to put that money into it. It all comes down to having that conversation with the landlord and asking them the question. You might not need to have credit checks in the same way as you have credit checks when you try and purchase a property, because a mortgage provider, a lender, is always going to ask for credit checks. So you might not need to have that in place. It depends which letting agent that you go to. And essentially, that property is going to secure income for you for the next 5 years. Now, if you were interested in buying that property as well, what you could do, the way that you could structure this is you could structure this so that the profit that you're generating from that property, you don't touch, you don't let it, you don't spend that money, you keep that separate in a bank account. And essentially, what that property is doing is it's generating you the income to save up for your deposit to buy that property, which is insane. You're using the landlord's own money to give you the deposit to buy that property from them to continue to make money from that property. It's an incredible, incredible tool that you can use. Now, the cons of rent to rent, obviously, that you don't own the assets. Now, in terms of cash flow and the money that you generate from the income, from the rental income, okay, that's not going to affect that, but it is going to affect the capital appreciation or your how you can take advantage of that capital appreciation of that property. You're not going to build your equity from owning that property for a long time because you don't own the property. The landlord is still going to benefit from that. What you're getting, though, is that rental income and the margin that you're creating from that rental income. Another con, and I've put it down as a con, but I just think this is sensible. The setup, that first month, I would say that it should take you no more than a month to set the property up. But realistically, it should take you no more than a couple of weeks. But let's say it's going to take you a month. It should take you no more than 1 month. And in that month, it can be intense. Because if you're going to set the property up as a HMO, there are some compliance things that you need to do. And so you'll need to work to your local council's HMO guidelines to get that property set up correctly. And if you do that, you want to get that done as quickly as possible so that you can get the tenants in as quickly as possible so that you can start making money. So you've got to push in that first month to get that property ready. And then once you've got the property ready, I'll be honest, if this is not something, if HMO management or service accommodation management is not something that you've done before, to start off with, it's going to require effort and attention to make sure that your void periods are as minimal as possible. That's where your success comes from. As soon as you get these properties set up, you should be all about filling those rooms because the higher your occupancy, the more money you put in your own pocket. And that goes from HMO and serviced accommodation. So you've got to be prepared to put the effort in to get your occupancy as high as possible. Don't think that this is just a set and forget kind of strategy. It ain't like that. You've got to be busy. And then there's less control than if you owned the property, which goes without saying. So that landlord can still choose what they want to do with that property over the long term, whereas you don't have that choice because it's just a rental contract that you have with that landlord. Now, I can see that's the end of this slide, but I can see that a couple of you have already asked some questions. So let me just go and have a look at that. So that first one, Shad, thanks for telling me, no problem. Uh, so you've asked about a replay. So Shad, this is all being recorded, and because you have registered, you will also get a copy of the recording. I hope that helps. So from the end of this slide, let's just do a quick summary. The pros are huge. The pros, the benefits of doing rent to rent or using rent to rent as a strategy are massive. It's completely your choice which property you go for. So you do your own due diligence. You can predict how much money you're going to make from that property, and it can be a life-changing amount of money. Let's be completely honest. Per month, if I was to say, I'll give you an extra £1,000 a month for the next 5 years, you'd probably jump at it, right? And it's going to take a bit of effort and it's going to take a bit of management, but you can systemize a lot of what you need to do once you've got used to it, and you can make that work for you. So you're picking between one of these two models. And if you don't know what these models are, what these strategies are, let me address that for you now. So first of all, you can use HMO. So a HMO is a house of multiple occupation. So instead of renting that house out to one person, you're going to split it by the bedrooms, and you're going to rent out each one of those bedrooms and give them, and also give them access to the communal space of the property. So typically you might think of this as like a student kind of accommodation, a student setup. But HMO is so much more sophisticated than that these days. There are different kinds of HMOs that you can get, and you can get some very, very high-end HMOs. We operate a large HMO in Hull, which is a 24 bed, and it comes with a cinema, it comes with a gym in the accommodation, it comes with a pool table, it comes with multiple kitchens. It's a really high-end place to be, but it's the same as any other kind of HMO. The bedrooms are billed individually, and then all of those people that rent a bedroom from us also get access to the communal area. But typically, your one house is going to set up 6 different tenancies because we'd probably try to focus on houses that have got 5 bedrooms. And then what we do, especially for rent to rent, is we'd use those 5 bedrooms and rent those 5 bedrooms out as individual tenancies. But we'd also try and separate a room downstairs, like an extra reception room or a dining room. And we'd use that and we'd convert that into a bedroom as well. So a 5 bedroom house would create a 6 bedroom HMO. So if let's say you're earning £5,000 per room, and that's 6 tenancies, that's £3,000 income that you're generating from that property. Whereas the landlord might be willing to rent that out to a single family on a normal buy-to-let tenancy for £1,000 a month. And these numbers I'm just using from the top of my head. So what you'll then need to do is, for the HMO, you'll then need to sign that agreement. You'll need to furnish the property. You'll need to ensure that you're compliant with your local HMO regulations. So if you want to know what they are, go to your council's website and look in the housing department, look for the HMO guide. Look for the HMO guide, and that will detail what kind of things that you need to put in depending on how many people you've got in that HMO. You'll also, from a compliance point of view, you also might need to tell the council that you're changing the use class of that property. So a normal residential use class will be C3. For a HMO up to 6 people, that would change to C4. So you'd need to inform the council about that. If you want to put more people in than 6, then that changes the use class again to something called sui generis. And for that, you would need to fill in a full planning application, which comes with cost, and it comes with risk as well, because they might say no. So usually from a rent to rent perspective, you don't normally see rent-to-rent properties that are more than six people. So what you would then do is you would then set up and start to build the accounts for all the utilities, and you would get them billed to you because the HMO tenants will be expecting to have all bills paid for within their one rental payment. So you take care of all of that, but then what you're left with after you've taken in the income, you've paid the rent that you owe the landlord, you've paid your bills, what you're left with, that's yours. That goes in your pocket. So that's from a HMO perspective. And again, I can see that somebody's asked a question. So let me just go and have a quick look at that. So the question is, does rent to rent still work with the new renters reform bill as tenants can leave? How do we work with as tenants can leave? How do we work with that problem where we can lose more money as occupancy can be low? I know you can get better tenants, but how do we navigate the issues at hand? Is rent to rent dying due to these changes? Absolutely not. No, it isn't in any way. And actually, that tenants can always leave. Tenants will tend to sign a 6 month AST, but then after that 6 months, it just goes onto a rolling contract anyway. So all you're missing out on is that 6 months at the beginning where you know that they can't leave. Now, if you go through a viewing with somebody, you can get a good perspective from the questions that you ask them as to how long they're going to want to take that property from you for. So from the question that you asked and the example that you've given does not threaten rent to rent in any way, to be perfectly honest with you. If you go one step further, the more pertinent question from the Renters Reform Bill is that what how do you get rid of all the tenants at the end of the tenancy? Because it's the tenant's right to be in that property is more restricted. Well, actually, the rental contract or the lease contract that you sign with the owner of the property is not subject to the Renters Reform Bill. So if that owner of the property says that they want the property back, you can still give notice to the tenants that are in the property and then hand the property back normally. That's the bigger risk to the rent to rent and Renters Reform Bill, but it's still handled. It's still okay. It's not a problem. So looking at service accommodation is the other option that you can use. So service accommodation, you might not have heard of it called that before, but it's basically Airbnb or booking.com, that kind of rent. So short term, and you might think of this as like a holiday let, but actually the holiday accommodation only satisfies 50% of the market. There's another 50% of the market that the majority of people miss out on when they're thinking about what can be used as serviced accommodation. And that is business, that's the corporate market. Because the holiday market, of course, it's there during times of like school holidays and weekends. But then what do you do from Monday to Friday, the majority of the year? Well, that is the corporate market that you need to focus on. So it's not necessarily thinking, I've got the latest service accommodation that I've set up, for example, is in Warrington. Now, you wouldn't associate Warrington with holidays or going on holiday to Warrington. But the service accommodation performs really, really well because it's got a really good mix of holiday people that are on holiday because they're going to Manchester or Liverpool, and also corporate people because again they're going to Manchester or Liverpool, or there are good corporate HQs or offices around the Warrington location. So you've got to think about holiday and business. So where basically is there a lot of activity going on? So the way that service accommodation makes money is by charging per night because it's short-term rentals. So it's 100, let's say, use this as an example. So it's £130 per night, and you multiply that by 30 nights because on average, there's 30 nights in a month. You times that by 70%, and that equals £2,730 per month. So again, you're increasing dramatically the amount of money that you can make from that property in comparison to what you have to pay the landlord, which is £1,000 in this example. Obviously, you would need to furnish and dress the property really, really well. You would also need to make sure that you take absolutely exceptional photos of that property. because serviced accommodation is one of the only property strategies where you're probably not going to do a viewing. The majority of people are just going to book based on what the pictures look like. So the pictures, the quality of the pictures, the amount of information that you can put across in that pictures in a stylish way will generate you the income from serviced accommodation. Again, you would need to pay all the bills, so you'd set them all up in your company name, and then you would put them onto the platforms like Airbnb and like Booking.com. You would then manage those properties, which we'll get to in just a couple of minutes. But before we get to how to manage them, we're going to look at where you find the deals from, because this is something that I see quite a lot, that people don't believe that this kind of property is available and uh, is just out there, and the owners want to sign a 5-year contract with you to get £1,000 a month when they might understand that you're going to make more money from that property. Just got two more questions, so I'm going to have a look at them now. Can you say a bit about insurance requirements? Yeah, sure. So insurance requirements, if you're going to be the rent-to-renter, you basically have the right to insure something that you own. So the landlord, the person that owns the property, would still need to have buildings insurance for that property. If you want to get boiler repair insurance, again, you don't own that boiler, so you can't insure it. So the landlord has to get boiler repair insurance. But then, let's say it's 30 quid through British Gas. You would then come up with an agreement where you pay that you pay the landlord 30 quid a month because they arrange the insurance, and they'd put you on the insurance so you can talk to British Gas about it. In terms of insurance for the stuff inside the property, like the furniture, you can absolutely insure that. So you can get contents insurance for that rent to rent property. That's kind of bog standard stuff. If you're running that rent to rent property through a limited company, you can also get like income loss insurance and all kinds of different insurance products. But from a property perspective, the property has to be insured by the landlord for the property, the bricks and mortar, for the outside of the property itself. I hope that helps. And I've got one other question. With the way the market is, there seems to be plenty of people wanting to rent houses. Firstly, why would a landlord rent to me to rent out as a HMO or serviced accommodation? And secondly, where do I find these landlords that are willing to do this? I'm just about to get to exactly that slide. In fact, you can probably see it on your screen already. So where would you get these properties from? You'd get them from Rightmove. And let's be honest, there's a lot of properties out there, and the rental market has gone crazy in the last couple of years, right? There's been a lot of people that want to rent. There's been not as much supply, and so the price of rental has gone up. So why would a landlord rent to you instead of going out to somebody else? Well, first of all, I've already given you a clue as to one of the big answers for this. The contract that you have with the landlord, because it's a lease, is not subject, and it's between two companies, not from a company to a consumer. That means that it's not subject to the changes in the renters reform bill, which means that you can put what you've got far more flexibility for what you can put into that contract. So from the landlord's point of view, if they say that they want the property back, they can have in that contract that you will hand the property back in X amount of time. Now, from your point of view, you have got a contract that ends with an individual consumer. So you need to be mindful of the renters reform bill, because there's no point in saying to the landlord you can have the property back with a month's notice when you can't do that. You need to give the tenants 4 months notice. But actually, that's better than all the rent to rent properties that I ever signed up, because on any of the rent to rent properties that I signed up, I always used to say it was 6 months notice, and I didn't have a problem with signing people up. Now, to answer the main question of why would a landlord choose to rent to you, it's because you're giving them 5 years. You're saying, I'm going to rent this property from you for 5 years. And in that time, you are not going to experience a single void period. That already is going to save them, on average, 10% per year in voids. That's a massive benefit. And actually, if you break it down, you can put some other incentives in there as well. If you've got somebody who's wavering as to whether they go with this or not, You can also say to them, I'll also contribute towards the maintenance of the property every month. If you're going to be making enough money from this property, you can say, I'll contribute the first £100, £200, £250 towards any maintenance that needs to be done. So not only am I going to rent your property out, I'm also going to put my own money into taking care of your property. Are you going to get a better deal than that from a letting agent? You're probably not. And what you can also do, even if you're a letting agent, you can say to them, I'm not going to charge you commission for renting this property out. We've just looked at an example where if you rent it from the landlord for £1,000, if you re-rent it out, if you sublet it for £3,000, if you pay the landlord that £1,000 back, if you pay your bills of £500, you're making £1,500 a month. Why on earth would you want to put them off by charging a commission as well? Now you think about that for a second, right? Because that means that if they go with a high street agent, they think they're getting £1,000 worth of rent every single month. But you take off 10% for voids, you take off 10% for maintenance, you take off 10% for the commission that the letting agent's going to charge them. They're not making £1,000, they're making £700. But with you, when you say you're going to give them £1,000, you're actually going to give them £1,000. That adds almost 50% onto the amount of money that they're actually making from that property because it goes up from 700 to 1,000. That's why they'd rent from you. Just got another question. In rent to rent HMO, is rent to rent HMO also possible with social housing? I believe the requirement with social housing is stricter, such as fire doors and size of the rooms. Well, John, the requirements for HMO as a standard, if you've got a property that's um, over four people, is to have fire doors and the size of room. So the size of the room needs to be at least the size of the bedroom needs to be at least 6.51 square meters, and all rooms that are leading onto that communal central space, which tends to be a hall, all need to be fire doors. So the requirements for social housing don't really change. In fact, social housing might be slightly less strict. But for me, whether I rent it out for social housing or whether I rent it out on the private market, it all comes down to money. And how much are they going to pay for the social housing tenants and how much can they get on the open market? It's that simple. So where do you find these properties from? There are some questions, there's some more questions coming through, but I'm going to continue with the content just for the minute and then I'll get to questions towards the end. So where do you find deals from? So HMO deals, surprisingly, Rightmove. Now, it's a massive, massive opportunity because you can see on Rightmove the majority of deals that go on the market for rent are single let deals. So you know how much that landlord wants for that property and that they're willing to let it out as a single let. You also know the address of that property. You have all of the information that you need in that Rightmove advert to work out whether that property is going to work for a HMO, a rent-to-rent deal for a HMO or a rent-to-rent deal for serviced accommodation. You've got direct access to the agent who's managing that property, but also because you've got the address of that property, you can put that into land registry and you can find out the owner's name and the owner's home address. You would use spareroom.com for your data. Spareroom will have all the HMO rooms that are available in the local area. It will have pictures of those rooms as well, so you can see that they're compliant, how big they are, which ones are getting the best rent. And that will allow you to do your financial analysis on that property to work out if it's going to work as a rent-to-rent HMO. Now, the only other thing that you need to do is you need to work out whether the layout of that property will allow you to add that extra bedroom downstairs. And 9 times out of 10, you can do that from the pictures that you get in Rightmove. Rightmove gives you everything. So when you see that property on Rightmove it's in the right location, it's got the right size bedrooms, and it's the right size of property, you can go directly to that letting agent and arrange a viewing and try and get in there and try and convince that letting agent that what you want to do is in the best interest of their clients. They put your offer through to their client and they decide to work with you. Now, that's a delicate conversation, and some letting agents are going to get it and some aren't. Okay, to be perfectly frank with you, some letting agents will see you as a risk and a threat. But that's only option A. And I would always go to the letting agents first because if you convince a letting agent that this is a good strategy and it benefits you both, because obviously if it was still going through the letting agent, they'd be getting the commission. They'd be getting the commission from the rent, which doesn't cost you anything because it's taken from the gross rent. Um, if you're going to be using, if that's going to go through that letting agent, but if that letting agent says no, then you've got a plan B, and your plan B is to then go through land registry and send a letter directly to the owner of the property and circumvent that letting agent. Now, you've got a lot of flexibility in letting contracts because a lot of them are not actually time bound. A lot of people that say that they want to use a letting agency to let out their property, the letting agent will advertise it, but the landlord won't actually be tied to that letting agent for any specific period of time, which means that you can propose what you want to the owner of the property. And if they agree to go with it, they can just disinstruct the letting agent that they've currently chosen. Straightforward. Always go to the letting agent first because if you convince that letting agent that what you're doing is a good idea, then you'll get access to every other property that they've got on the market to rent and every property that they've got in the future on the market to rent. So it's always a good idea to go to the letting agent first. With service accommodation, it's exactly the same. You go to Rightmove. Go to Rightmove, find stuff that's on there that looks like it would rent out well. And then you can use products like AirDNA. So AirDNA takes all the information from Airbnb and one other supplier, and it compiles them in a way where you can see what the average nightly rates are, average occupancy is, um, what bookings, what times of year have a higher income rate. You can see a huge amount of data, and you can use that data for your analysis of that property. You can also go onto Airbnb and double check that with all the stuff that you can see on Airbnb. But you can put that financial analysis together, which is triggered by finding stuff on Rightmove that works. You can even go to Airbnb and Airbnb and see what's popular in that area. What's popular, what always seems to have bookings. Because again, it's all about that occupancy. Keeping that occupancy high will make you more money. And like I said to you before, headquarters or local business hubs are absolutely fantastic for bringing in that corporate trade between Monday and Friday in times outside of traditional holiday periods. As well as HQs and local business hubs, you'd also look for large construction projects. You know, if roads are being built, if bridges are being built, if there's power plants are being either decommissioned or structured, then they will have engineers in those areas for long periods of time. And they'll look at these as for this serviced accommodation as an option to give them housing flexibility when they need to be called in or out. Again, on Rightmove, you can see all the information that you need to do your financial analysis and work out whether that property is going to work for you as a rent to rent deal. So, how much can you make? I'm actually going to give you this is genuinely something that I was a game changer for me, a real game changer. We'll go through the HMO example first. So in the HMO example, if you're looking through Rightmove and you find a 4 bed, you know that you want to turn that into a 5 bed HMO. So if you've got 5 bedrooms, you might have done your research and you'll see that in your area, you can create each bedroom that you'll rent out, you'll get about 750 quid for. So that means that the rent that you're taking in from that HMO is £3,750. You pay the bills, so that takes 500 quid off. You take your profit off. So let's say that your profit is the same as 1 month's rent. That leaves you with £2,500. Now that £2,500 is the maximum rent that you can pay for that property. This equation tells you what you can pay. So what you can do is you go to Rightmove and you set a search up for 4 bedroom houses to let with a maximum rent that you can pay of £2,500. And what that does is that will then filter everything out that doesn't work financially. But every property that now shows up in that filter works financially as long as you can fit that fifth bedroom in there downstairs. So you've done your financial analysis of HMO. Now you just need to do the layout analysis. From a serviced accommodation point of view, it's very similar. So if you know that you can rent a two-bedroom flat out for 130 quid a night, and based on a 70% occupancy, that's going to generate you £2,730. Take the bills off of 500, take the profit off that you want to generate, which you do as, I think that's six times the nightly rate, just to give you a decent margin. That means the maximum rent you can pay for that two bedroom flat is £1,450. So again, you go into Rightmove, you go to the rental section, you choose two-bedroom flats with a maximum price to pay per month of £1,450, and you know that that's going to work as a serviced accommodation unit on Airbnb. You've got the data. This is all backed up by that data that you find from those providers, either spare room for HMO or AirDNA and Airbnb for serviced accommodation. It couldn't be simpler. So now you go and speak to the agent. I'd say 70% of the time the agent's going to say no. But now you've got a plan B where you can contact the owner of the property directly and you can tell them all that good stuff that I've already told you about void periods, about putting your own money into the flat because you know that you're going to be generating enough money to throw £1,000, sorry, to throw £100 per month back at keeping that property in good order for the person that owns the property. And that you know you're going to be making that profit because you've seen the data on occupancy for either HMO or serviced accommodation. It's all about maths. So now what? So you've run the numbers and how do you get started? So with a HMO, you sign your contract with the owner. So however you've gone through that owner, if you've gone through the letting agent, or if you've gone through sending them a letter and finding out their address on land registry, you go through that process and you sign a contract with the owner, and it has to allow subletting. You make the property compliant with HMO regulations, which you've got from your local council, from the housing department of your local council. You furnish the rooms. Now, don't think that furnishing the rooms is necessarily going to be a big capital cost because now you can get furnishing companies that allow you to lease the furniture. So actually, you're paying for this furniture through the lease that you're signing, through the money that you're creating from that HMO. So you don't even have to dig into your own pocket to find this to make that margin. You use that lease or you buy that furniture and you furnish that property to a good standard. And then you list the individual rooms and you can list them on Rightmove or you can list them on Spare Room. Personally, I found Spare Room incredibly effective for finding tenants. You would need to have an AST tenancy ready, but you wouldn't use an AST tenancy between you and the property owner. Between you and the property owner, you would probably use something like a common law tenancy agreement or a lease agreement. And then for the tenants, you would use an AST agreement. And you're essentially becoming a letting agent at that point. Even though you might only be letting one property, you essentially fulfill the role of a letting agency. So you need to make sure that you're compliant with any regulations around that in the local area as well. And then you prepare for viewings. People are going to look at the property, they're going to see the pictures, they're going to make inquiries. You need to answer those inquiries, you need to take them on viewings. A little tip. Whenever I was taking somebody around properties, especially around a new property where nobody else was living at the time, I would always walk them around the property, end in the best room, and in the best room start your negotiation because you're standing in the best room. So that's going to give you the best chance of getting a positive outcome from that person. I also employed a cleaner. I employed a cleaner for HMOs, and that cleaner went in once a week. And that cleaner did only the communal areas. So they didn't do any of the tenants' bedrooms, they just did the communal areas. And so what I would do is I would also give that cleaner a checklist so that every time they went in there, they had a checklist to make sure that everything in that property was good. And that meant that I didn't have to keep going into that property to make sure that it was clean and tidy and it wasn't damaged and everything was running properly and the heating was working and there weren't any leaks and all of that kind of stuff. So I created a checklist that I gave to the cleaner. And every Friday, when I had 6 rent-to-rent properties, I'd get an email from the cleaner and they would take me through each one of those checklists for each one of the properties. So even that reduced my travel time, so I didn't have to go to these properties once a week. I knew that the cleaner was going to do it for me. So that's how you'd set up from a HMO perspective. From serviced accommodation, essentially the same thing. You've got in front of that landlord. You've convinced them that rent to rent is the right way to do it. So you sign the contract with them, you furnish and dress the property, and then you take those professional photos because they make the world of difference. You look through Airbnb, there's still some really crappy photos on Airbnb. And you know what? You'll find if you look at the diary for that property, that the property has got more availability than all the other properties around it that have got professional photos. Why? Because the photos aren't very good. So take professional photos. It's going to cost you about 100 to 150 quid and it's worth its weight in gold. You then list the property on Airbnb or booking.com or any other channels that you want to use. And again, you employ a cleaner for the turnarounds. So it's really important that you employ a cleaner and they understand that it's going to be used for serviced accommodation. For me, the cleaner that I employ has got a 48-hour restriction. So if I took a booking today, I couldn't take a booking for tomorrow. It would have to be the day after because I know that the cleaner can't get in by tomorrow. It's not fair on their diary. Now, what I can do though is I can give the cleaner access to the diary. So I don't even need to instruct the cleaner when they need to go in. They look on my Airbnb account and they see when the bookings are and they arrange to go in to service those bookings and they know when they're expected to go in. So I don't even have to talk to them. And in fact, the two-bedroom flat that I have has got an option in the second bedroom whether I use it as a king size double bed or two single beds. And that's one of the questions that I ask the guests, and the cleaner has access to that conversation so they can see the preference that that guest has chosen. Now, that cleaner does that for me for a very reasonable fee. They also remove all the bedding and wash it off site and then bring it back. So I've got three sets of bedding that are constantly cycled around that mechanism. And the cleaner takes care of all of that for me. And then at the end of the month, I get a bill from the cleaner for the different times that they've been in and taking care of the property for me. Getting a good cleaner, testing them out, making sure that they're right and they're up to the job will dictate how much time you need to spend on that serviced accommodation unit. You get a good cleaner, it'll take you no time at all. I answer the questions still that are sent to me on Airbnb in the messages. I would say that on that Airbnb, it probably takes me about 20 to 25 minutes per week to manage those messages. That's it. Because it's all automated, it's all set up. Even the dynamic pricing that I have set up around the local area, so the Airbnb will automatically put the price up when demand goes up or put the price down when demand goes down. But it also sets up all the automations in the messages so that as soon as somebody books, I send them a message. And it's a templated message. As soon as somebody is going to go the day before they get to the property, I send them instructions on how to get to the property. The day that they check in, I tell them about the information. I tell them how to check into the property, where the keys are, how the access codes and all that kind of stuff. And then when they leave, I ask them for feedback. And one of the best things that I get is the five-star reviews at the end of that transaction. So now when I've talked to you about the importance of occupancy, and I've run HMOs, rent-to-rent HMOs, and I've run serviced accommodation. This is a game changer. This is genuinely a game changer, and I don't see enough people doing this. So what you would do is when you know that you need occupancy, you put yourself on the portals, so either Airbnb or Spare Room, whichever your strategy is. But also you go to LinkedIn and you'd search for HR professionals that are in your area. So if you're in Milton Keynes, you'd put HR Milton Keynes. And then everybody that comes up, you'd send a direct message to through LinkedIn and you'd offer them help, basically, because a lot of those headquarters in the HR department are going to be booking hotel rooms or managing travel so that people from outside the area can come into the area and work for a short or long period of time. Now they're going to have to go over where the best places to live are, where the public transport around the area. They're going to have those conversations time and time again. So offer to fulfill that for them. Say that you're an expert in the local area. so that you're a letting agent in the local area, you run a rent to rent company, and that you can help people find accommodation. And that it's going to help them get on with the things that are actually really important in their job rather than, having these conversations time and time again. And what will happen is they will, like happened to me with a company that was based in Knutsford in Cheshire, they made me part of their onboarding system. So when somebody was appointed to come in for either a short period of time or a long period of time, they would be given my contact details. They'd confirm the first day that they're going to be employed, and they would confirm my contact details and say, talk to this person about accommodation. And I that made me thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds. This is absolutely a game changer. Get yourself in with local businesses, whether it's service accommodation or HMO, it doesn't matter. Get yourself in with local businesses. They will provide you tenants. If you're close to a hospital, get in with the hospitals. Again, talk to the HR department, solve problems for them, and then they will work with you. Genuine game changer. So if you make £1,500 profit per month over 5 years, that's £90,000 from one property over those 5 years. Now, you can choose to spend that on a monthly basis, or you can just leave it in an account accruing. If you have five of those properties over those 5 years, that's going to make you £450,000. That is a significant amount of money. If you then want to go and start buying HMOs, this can facilitate that. Instead of just thinking, I'm going to work hard, I might get a bonus at the end of the year, I might be able to start putting some money aside, just set up a HMO, set up a rent to rent HMO, set up rent to rent service accommodation. And that can help you get to that point where you start owning property and building equity, which is really where the wealth is. This is cash flow. When you're looking at wealth and when you're looking at equity creation, this can help you get to that point sooner. So if you're ready to look at this in more depth, and this is a webinar, right? So I can't give you all of the information that we include on the 2-day training course that we run for anybody that's a property partner with Sourced. It's 2 days and we go through it in a lot more detail. We do role plays, we talk about scripts, we talk about how to structure those letters. But if you're interested, you can book a strategy call with us. You can download our rent to rent guide. And then ultimately, if it's a good fit for you, you can join the Source community. So we're going to send out, this is a recording over the next 24 hours or so. We'll also send links to how you can book that strategy call with us. So use those links, book in a strategy call and tell us how you want to get started. And we'll give you some tips and we'll show you how we can help you get to that position where you're potentially earning £450,000 or you're securing that amount of cash flow over the next 5 years. So right now, that's the end of my part, but it's over to you. If you want to ask me any questions, you can absolutely do that now. So, Chris, you've asked what methods you can use to ensure that the voids are filled quickly. Hopefully that's helped, especially that LinkedIn example that I gave you. That is an absolute game changer. But in short, the best way to make sure that you're not going to have voids is to make sure that you're signing up the right property with the right level of demand before you sign up to it. That's the best way by far. If you're identifying that demand before you sign that property up, voids are not going to be an issue for you. If you're pushing it because you can't establish that there is that demand for that kind of property, then avoid it. Wait until you've got something that you know is going to rent out. The rent to rent guide is we'll send a link to that tomorrow in the email that we send out to you. Is social housing a good strategy at this time and does rent to rent work? It can do. It's all about the numbers. You just got to run the numbers. If the numbers don't work because social housing would typically pay at the local housing association rates, which is typically lower than open market rate. And if that was the case, I would probably use the open market and I'd go out to the open market instead of using social housing as the option. Trevor, how can Source support us? So we have a property partner network of a few hundred people within Sourced, and we provide them the training and the support and the advice and guidance in order to set up and run their property income. So you might start with something like rent to rent and start establishing a cash flow from it. And then we'll help you then transition into owning property. And every property that you find will help you analyze. We actually look at every property that you want to move forward on to give you a second set of eyes on it to make sure that you're doing the right thing and you're making the right decisions. And then we'll support you all the way through that process. Who runs the bookings? Well, that's up to you, Paul. But in the examples that I've given you, you would run the bookings. You can still use an agent and put an agent in there, but I see that as unnecessary. Don't pay the agent, keep that money for yourself. You essentially become the agent. But again, with that Airbnb, I actually run all the bookings for that Airbnb, and it doesn't, it takes me 25 minutes because it's all automated and it's all automated through their system. So it doesn't need anything other than the system that they've put in place. If you decide to become a property partner with Sourced as well, we've got a huge amount of technology that we give you in order to find the information that you're looking for here. We give you CRM systems, we give you property analysis tools, and I mean, most of all, we give you the experience that we've had. Is the renters reform bill a more positive or negative for rent to rent? Shad, I'd say that it's not made any difference at all, so it's neither. Is it possible to run rent to rent HMO and Airbnb while doing a full-time job? Well, yeah, I do it now. I do it right now. Yeah, and I did rent to rent HMO while I had a full-time job. In fact, it wasn't a full-time job. It was more than a full-time job because it was my own company. So I used to work about 60 hours a week in that and then run five rent to rent HMOs at the same time. Again, it's all about that automation, which we go into in a lot more detail in the courses that we put on for our property partners. So yeah, you absolutely can. And right now, I'm currently running one Airbnb service accommodation unit, and I'm taking on another 13. Um, Again, with a full-time job. So absolutely, yes, you can, John. Absolutely, yes. Unquestionably, yes, because I'm doing it right now. Did you say how much housekeeping is? No, I didn't, Paul. And it depends on your local area, and it depends on what you can negotiate. I'll tell you what I pay. I pay per turnaround on my serviced accommodation, two-bedroom flat, 60 quid. And but that cost is then put into Airbnb as the cleaning cost. So I do and I don't pay it. I've agreed to it, but I don't pay it directly. The guest pays it. Now I went into a lot of effort to find the right cleaning company and to keep that price down because obviously if that price is lower, I'll get more bookings. I did get a quote for 180 quid per turnaround. But if I'd had that as the cleaning fee, then obviously I'd get fewer bookings. So it's in my interest to negotiate that down. What does it cost to get this partnerships? We'll send you some information, Lorena. I'll pass your information on to Sam and he will contact you directly. Do you help with all the necessary scripts, letters, and contracts? Do you have teams of property solicitors and other professionals to call on? We don't have solicitors in-house, but we can absolutely help you with the scripts. And I'll be honest, that most of the scripts come from me. And when I first started doing rent to rent, there was no training on rent to rent whatsoever. I've been doing this strategy for a long time. And I went through the first year that I did rent to rent, I didn't have any success at all. And like I say, this was about 15 years ago. I didn't have any success. But my perspective was if I hear the same bit of negative feedback twice, I need to change that part in the system. And so the system, the process that I had evolved and evolved and evolved and evolved until 12 months down the line, I had the finished article, I had the finished system. And that system then generated me six rent to rent HMO properties in the next 6 months. That system absolutely works. And we share all of that system with you. Questions are coming through thick and fast. So back to John. How further in term of location from where you live would you advise in management properties with this strategy? Yeah, really good question, that actually. Um, it's how far you're willing to go. So for me, I chose not to travel more than 20 minutes because I knew that I had the liability of having to go there quickly sometimes. I didn't. When I was running those, when I was running the five HMOs, that used to take me no more than 2.5 hours a week. But I knew that I had to go to the properties. I might have to go to the properties regularly. So for me, it was 20, 25 minutes. But then, and then that is subjective. You might be happy to travel 30 minutes, 45 minutes. And if you are, great. That's where that's where you should do your hunting. So the person that's just written the question, could you also put me in touch with someone I could talk to? You've put yourself through as an anonymous attendee, so I wouldn't be able to do that because I can't see your contact details. So you'll have to get back in touch with us. I suggest use the email address sam.clayton@sourced.co. So that's Sam, S-A-M dot Clayton, Clayton at sourced, SOURCED dot co. And it's just dot co at the end. So that looks like it's the end of the questions. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your questions. Thanks very much for spending your afternoon with me. I'll now leave you to enjoy the rest of your day and to start daydreaming about what you're going to do with the income that you can make from your serviced accommodation or your HMO rent to rent. So thanks very much, guys. I'll keep an eye out for future webinars and hopefully I'll see you soon.